Welcome back to another live stream. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everything is set up well. The first thing to say is happy antinatalism day. So we've got Duz straight in the chat. Hello, Duz. If you're watching already, there is... How many people are watching already? 12 people at the moment watching. So if you are watching, please say hello in the chat. It's always nice to see who's there. We've got Tinku as well, which I'm not sure I've seen you in the chat before, Tinku. So welcome if it's your first time. We've got Kane as well in the chat, Syndicate in the chat. Welcome everyone, welcome everyone. So Bert is in the chat as well. So today is International Antinatalism Day. And actually one thing I thought about literally just before coming on was I should have reminded myself and looked into how this day came around. Because, you know, there's a day for pretty much everything now. So, like, but each of those days has to be, I don't know how you instituted or coined by someone. And I think I have a vague idea. The thing is, there's a couple of days related to antinatalism. And I think I have a vague idea of how this day came about, but I might be mixing it up with one of the other ones. So I don't want to share the wrong thing. So at least I'll have a whole year to look into it for next time. But yeah, so I don't have how this day actually came about. But nonetheless, we have got some excitement in store. So today is International Antinatalism Day. Obviously, we're going to do something antinatalism related, which is not a surprise because all of my streams are antinatalism related. So in this stream, we're going to be doing two things. The first thing is we are going to be doing a general reaction to something. So it's going to feel a lot like a normal stream. But we've got something super interesting to react to, which I'll go into in a minute. But what we also have... Let me turn my notifications off on my phone, otherwise I'm going to get distracted. What we also have, though, is we're doing a fundraiser, which you can probably see from the thingy just here, which I've spelt wrong as well. I've spelt it wrong. You can see that with the contrast. I've put MSI Reproductive Choices. Fuck me. So, yeah. So if you don't know, we're going to go a bit over who MSI Reproductive Choices are and the potential impact that we can have today. So, yeah, we are doing a fundraiser. So I know there are a few amongst you that sometimes donate during live streams, which is really appreciated. If anyone can who doesn't normally, and obviously those who usually do, if they can again, please donate during this live stream because this is a fundraiser. All the funds from this live stream are going to be two things. One, given to MSI Reproductive Choices, and two, they are going to be matched by a private donor matcher, however you want to say it. So all donations up to £150 are going to be matched. So if we reach £150, which is a lot less than we were aiming for in the previous fundraiser, but I thought there's not been an insane amount of time since that one, and this was a relatively I didn't advertise this one as much, and I didn't plan it as much ahead of time. And there's not as big a thing I'm doing. So this one, we're going for £150. Hopefully we can make it, but basically anything up to and including £150 will be matched. So we could make £300 today, which will go to MSI Reproductive Choices, or more if we reach 150 and people still donate. It's just that other stuff won't be matched. So that's very cool. So that's going to be going to MSI Reproductive Choices. So let's say hello to a couple more people in the chat, and then I will go over a bit about MSI, and then we will get into what we're doing today. So one thing I'm going to say is I see Tinku has put a question in the chat, And Video Game Bar Space Station has also put a question in the chat. What I'm going to say is, I'm going to welcome people in the chat, but I'm not going to be answering questions in the chat because this is a fundraiser live stream. I'm going to try and really encourage people to donate during this live stream. So normally I would, obviously anything that comes through donation, I would interact with and answer. And I try to get to the chat as much as possible. But in this stream, if you want to ask a question or send me in a message, then send in a donation via the link in the pinned message in the chat. So if you look in the chat, there's a pinned message there. Go to that link and send in a donation via there. That is the preferable way, because one, if you do super chat, you can still do a super chat and it will count towards the fundraiser, but YouTube takes a big cut, like a significant cut, and it won't get picked up by this little bar, which is it's nice for everything to be tracked on this little bar. So if the only thing you can do is super chat, then by all means do that. That will still go towards MSI Reproductive Choices, but preferably via the chat in the link. If anyone wants to be a legend and get in there with the first donation, then go in now, so you can claim that. So let's say hello to a few more people. So Video Game Bar Space Station, welcome to the chat. We've got Bovine as normal. Bovine says, hi, every day is AN day where I am. That is very true. Massilia, welcome to the chat. Antinatalism, welcome to the chat. Inez, welcome to the chat. Racer, welcome to the chat. So, cool. Okay, so let's start with MSI. So, hopefully you guys can see this. So, this is MSI Reproductive Choices. So, they are a charity, and they work around the world on basically many things to do with reproduction, reproductive rights, trying to avoid, unintended pregnancies, providing abortions, all of this sort of stuff. So just to be clear, maybe I'll actually go back onto me for this. So one thing I want to say is, people might be thinking, well, it's antinatalism, International Antinatalism Day. Why aren't you raising money for an antinatalist organization? And there are actually like quite a few reasons, but one of the main, one of the reasons is because the thing is, I don't want to go too deep into this because it would be like a whole live stream in and of itself. But the reason that we're going for MSI Reproductive Choices is not because it's obviously not like an explicitly antinatalist organization. It's not saying our specific goal is to avoid births happening and sentient beings coming into existence. But the work that they do has that result anyway. Now, obviously, given the nature of, avoiding beings coming into existence, it's somewhat difficult to measure how many beings your efforts are going to actually avoid coming into existence. But MSI Reproductive Choices actually do a lot of tracking on the impact of their actions, and we can somewhat infer the potential impact of our donations via their calculator, which we will get into. And they do a lot of good work generally anyway, and it's very much aligned with antinatalism. So that's one of the reasons, and there are many others, but I don't want to get into them all now. So I can't remember what I was going to go on to next, but let's go back to MSI. So, like I said, they do all the work they do, and this is their impact calculator. So what's cool is you can actually put in the amount of money that you're going to donate. So let's say, hopefully, we do get the whole £150, which is then matched to £300. I'm not going to specifically choose anything here. We'll just go to the calculator and we can see what the impact is we could have. So if we do well in this fundraiser, and please do send in your donations, is with the £300, we could prevent 30 unintended pregnancies, which is amazing, because those unintended pregnancies, not all of them will go on to being created, right? But some of them will. And if we can avoid those pregnancies, help people avoid unintended pregnancies, one, obviously that's going to be a good thing for them and good in many other ways, but it's also going to avoid those beings coming into existence that would have been brought into existence as a result of those pregnancies being carried to term. 30 people reached with sexual and reproductive health care, 9 unsafe abortions averted, 60 disability-adjusted life years averted, and a host of other things. So all super cool stuff. If you want to get a bit more of an intro into MSI Reproductive Choices, which stands for Marie Stopes International Reproductive Choices, then I recommend checking out and like the potential impact of their actions, right? And why it could be very well worth supporting them. And one of the reasons why we're supporting them in this fundraiser is this article on the EA forum by Megan Blake, which is very informative, very cool, a lot of links. We're not going to read through it now, obviously, because because that's not the point of the live stream, and that would actually, reading it through as a group would actually be a bit, too much. But it's very interesting to go through it and read yourself. And there is a specific section where she talks about the number of births that we could reasonably see as being avoided by their work. And I should have actually highlighted where that is, which I cannot pinpoint at the moment. But there's loads of stuff here. And I think actually one of the sections that is important, especially to antinatalists, about avoiding births is actually if you go into the comments and read the comments. Somewhere in here, I am not going to read through it all to try and find the exact bit. But if you go through the comments as well, there's some interesting exchanges and there's some more detail in there that I think it's in the comments is specifically relevant to antinatalists. So, that is that covered. Now, let's say hello to a few more people who are in the chat, and then we will get on to talking about what we're actually doing today in this stream. And outrageously, no one has sent in a donation yet for the fundraiser. So if you're thinking about sending in a donation, please send it in now. Nothing is being taken by me for this. The money will be going to MSI Reproductive Choices. And if you're thinking, well, why don't I just donate it straight to them anyway? What's the point of donating here? There are a couple of reasons, but one of them is that it'll get matched. So if you want to donate £10, it'll get doubled to £20. So anything you donate is going to get doubled.
We bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
And that is the... Oh, and we've had 2 donations come in at once, and I think only one of them popped up on screen. So, let me just replay.
We bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much too. I'll replay the other one as well in case people missed it.
We bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Everyone remembers that legend. So thank you so much to the people who have just donated. 2 donations just come through. Both of them are absolute legends. The first donation says, great choice of charity for the fundraiser stream. And that was a £10 donation. You know who, they didn't leave their name, but you know who you are. Absolute legend. Thank you so much. And then we had a £20 come in. And I bet they both wanted to be the first donation, but the first one made it in first. So I can confirm, obviously I'm not going to share your name because you didn't share it, but 2 of you just donated. You know who you are. The person who donated £10 was the one who donated first. So the person who donated £20, I know who you are. You know who you are. Apologies. Better luck in the next fundraiser. But thank you so much for donating. Absolute legend. And they say for a great cause. So we're already 20% of the way to the goal of the fundraiser. So yeah, if people have money spare, then please send it in. It is all getting matched and all going to a great cause. So actually, we've already got £60 going to Marie Stopes' International Reproductive Choices. So keep those donations coming in, but let's see who is in the chat. So we got some new people in the chat. Foil Chip, Black Guy 999, Augustin. Hello, Augustin. Nice to see you here. If you haven't checked it out, check out the Antinatalism Around the World episode from Mexico. You will hear from Augustin there. Absolute legend. Superior is in the chat as well. Jeff, Alessandro. Welcome everyone to the chat. Cool. Okay, so what are we going to be going over in the stream today to keep us all entertained and invigorated? So let me get it ready. So boom, boom. Oh, you know what I should have done is okay, right. Well, I should have done it slightly differently, but it doesn't matter. I've done it the way that I've done it, and we we move with the times. So what we are doing today is reacting to this. Now, what this is basically, some of you may have already been following. So there's been this sort of mini series that has culminated in a discussion, which is like the sort of marzipan mini series, however you want to say it. So a few of you, you know, many of you will know Matti Heidi, who has been quite prominent on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast YouTube channel. He has had one actual episode. Is it just one? Well, they've done many mini series and videos on there. I think maybe he's only got one actual episode of the podcast itself. But one of the most recent things that Matti has done was doing a mini series on this fictional guinea pig or some other sort of rodent called Marzipan, and basically exploring some questions around death and killing as related to antinatalism, but specifically David Benatar's form of antinatalism he puts forward in Better Never to Have Been. So Matti did a 3-part mini-series on that, and then it culminated in him having a discussion with David Benatar to flesh out some of the maybe debates, misunderstandings, or clarifications and stuff like this. So that's what we're going to be reacting to. I think I left a comment under one of these videos. I think it was the first one. I can't actually remember what I said. But there's going to be plenty to get into. If you are the type... Sorry, I just choked on some air. If you're the type of person that loves to get into the sort of nitty-gritty and philosophy of this sort of stuff, then you're going to like this. If you don't, then you're going to fucking hate this stream. So just make your donation, and then you can drift off into fairyland and daydream. I'm going to take a sip of water because I don't know how much air I just choked on. So that is what we're going to be reacting to. I've merged all of them just into one video, boosted the volume, so hopefully everything's going to be good. Just a reminder, please keep those donations coming in. We are 20% of the way towards our goal. Everything is doubled, and it's all going to an amazing cause. So keep those donations coming in while we're watching the stream. Feel free to leave comments with your donation or ask questions with your donation. And I don't think there's anything else we need to go over. So I think we can start. All right, let's get into it with Matty.
In what follows, I will make no explicit claims about antinatalism. I will offer some observations about David Benatar's pessimistic philosophy as presented in his seminal 2006 book Better Never to Have Been, and suggest an answer that he could and maybe should, based on the book, give to a question about killing sentient beings or letting them die in the natural course of events. Imagine that you are the last human being alive. Imagine further that you share your life with a non-human companion, a guinea pig. Her name is Marzipan, and you are inseparable. She is also the last guinea pig alive. You are dying. Marzipan is in good health and can live for quite some time yet. For all you know, Marzipan's life in the end of the world scene would not be nice. It would, in fact, without your care and support, be quite miserable. You have a choice, however. Before you die yourself, you can painlessly end Marzipan's life. No more suffering for her. End of humankind, end of guinea pigs. What should you do? Imagine finally that you are the kind of person who thinks that David Benatar's pessimistic philosophy, as expressed in Better Never to Have Been, is essentially correct and a valid guide for important life decisions. Following the lead of another faith tradition, your question now assumes a new...
Also, apologies just because me sat near the bottom here, I'm kind of cutting off like bits of the text and stuff, but it just says, what would David Benatar do?
What would David Benatar do? In Better Never to Have Been, he makes two distinctions that are relevant here. The first is between ends and means. About the ends he has this to say. It would be better if humanity became extinct. It would be best if humanity came to an end sooner than later.
We bring children in this world and
My
we
argument
raise them to be warriors against evil.
We have another donation come in. There's no message with this one, but thank you so much for the donation. That is going to be doubled, so that is going straight to MSI Reproductive Choices, and that was for £5. So we're now on £35. Absolute legends. Keep them coming in. Thank you so much to that person. They don't leave their name, so I won't share who it was. But thank you so much for your donation to a very worthy cause. Let's continue.
Apply not only to humans but also to other sentient animals. From which we can deduce that the extinction of human and other sentient beings is desirable. About the means, he says, there are two ways in which a species can become extinct. The first is for it to be killed off. The second is for it to die off. So we have killing extinction and dying extinction, with some practical overlap, but conceptually.
Just before we go on to the means, so for the ends, my sort of general comments so far are, on like it would be better if humanity became extinct. It would be best if humanity came to an end sooner rather than later. Sooner than later. So on those 2 points, I know that Matty is specifically talking about what is in Better Never to Have Been. And I'm not going to be able to quote it verbatim here, but and this is going to relate to the next bit, is that, well, let's not specifically go into Better Never to Have Been actually at this point. Let's just say generally those two statements are basically just expressing like the thought of what would be better. So it's not a sort of condonement, if that is a word, as to what we should do. So you can think something would be better, but not think that we should actively like put effort into pursuing it, because the means may not be palatable or ethical, right? And obviously Matty's going to get on to means here. And then on here, my arguments apply not only to humans, but also other sentient animals. So I may be wrong on this, but my understanding and recollection is that that sentence is really specifically about like the philanthropic arguments that are made about philanthropic antinatalist arguments, basically saying it is also a harm for other animals to come into existence and we should not create them as a result. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now. Then we'll get on to means, and then we can go into it more. But yeah, what I will say is there may be some things that I'm missing here, because I'm not going to have the whole book verbatim in my head right now.
Distinct. Now, for our own species, David Benatar clearly prefers the die-off alternative, as he states. If people were to embark on a species-side program of killing humans, their actions would be plagued by moral problems that would not be faced by dying extinction. From which it is safe to conclude that the killing extinction of human beings would be wrong. The same caveat is not, however, repeated about other sentient beings, so we are, as far as better never to have been is concerned, left in their case with a more lenient conclusion. The killing...
Yeah. So, and I know that in the second and third episodes, and obviously in the discussion with Benatar, a lot of this stuff is going to get picked up on, and I think Matty maybe corrects some stuff in some of the episodes. The thing I would say here is that leaving out an explicit opposition to something in a book is not necessarily saying that it is okay or maybe okay. I know that if you're specifically going on like what is in the black and white lettering of this book and an explicit opposition to something isn't laid out, then you could say, yeah, well, there's room for, possibility here. But if you bring in the understanding of if you bring in an understanding of the views of the person that you're reading, you can make general sort of assumptions about what they're gonna think. So if Benatar is opposed to the killing of humans, going around in a species side, it's very likely he's also going to be opposed to going around and mass killing off other animals as well. Yeah, that's all I'll say on that as well at this point.
Extinction of non-human beings may not be wrong. Which is a relief for Marzipan, because if I have read the B-book correctly, David Benatar could and probably would permit you to end her life before your own demise.
In this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for another donation. Absolute legend towards the fundraiser. So now we are at 30% of the way to the fundraising goal. So absolutely legendary. So this donation comes with a question, which is, how did you come across MSI charity? I think, MSI used to be referred to as Marie Stopes, at least in my understanding. And Marie Stopes has been like very well known for quite a while. So I think I just heard about MSI just sort of like passively through life and people mentioning charities and stuff. like quite a long time ago, probably when I was a teenager. And I think I just sort of, but I wasn't really like fully aware of what they did and that sort of stuff. I was just like aware of the name and the fact it was a charity. And then I would say I became more acquainted with it around the time I became antinatalist, for obvious reasons, because I was surrounded by people who were more concerned about this specific topic. So I heard reference of the charity and stuff like this, and then when I would say I became more particularly interested in MSI within like the past couple of years, when I got more of an understanding of the fact that it's quite an effective charity to give your money to, and this article by Megan has a lot of information in it, so that sort of also reinvigorated an interest in MSI, and also since like wanting to do fundraisers like this and stuff, and thinking, what charities am I gonna pick to do the fundraisers for. And Family Empowerment Media was the first one. MSI is the one we're doing now. I think it would also be very cool to do an animal related one, because like there are charities you can donate to where you can sort of reasonably expect your donations to prevent quite a few animals from coming into existence, probably many more than the human births that you could avoid by donating to certain charities. But I just don't know if like doing an animal charity on the channel, like it's the same basic like points you're making, like you're donating to a charity to try and prevent births. They're animal births rather than human births. But I just don't know if people would be as willing to donate to it, because even though I see it as equally a valid antinatalist cause, there are many people who don't see it like that. And so I think antinatalists are more emotionally attached to the cause of human procreation, and so it's probably better to keep the fundraisers on that topic, even though I actually think like the money raised, in terms of the actual impact it could do, it may actually be more impactful to donate to animal charities. But it's a trade-off. It's like you've also got to work with what people are more sympathetic to and willing to give money to if you want to do fundraisers. And it's still a very good cause, obviously, to give to MSI or Family Empowerment Media or potential other charities that are focusing on human procreation. So, yeah. I think I maybe over-answered that question, but there you go. Thank you so much for the donation. That is going to get doubled. So far we've raised £90 because, it's £90, isn't it? Because everything is getting doubled. So thank you so much. Keep the donations coming in. Absolute legend. There was something else I was about to say, but I've forgotten. Yes. One thing I was going to say is in this video, so this the sort of, just to zoom out a bit, this general question about whether to euthanize a guinea pig. So I understand, I think Matty framed it at the start about, this is sort of going off Benatar's pessimistic philosophy rather than saying antinatalist philosophy, I think is what he said. But just to make the point about the link of antinatalism here. So this question of euthanizing a guinea pig, of course, isn't an antinatalist question. The guinea pig is already alive. This is a question explicitly about death ethics, right? Not about creation ethics. So this, as far as I'm concerned, is squarely outside of the category of a question for antinatalism. But, like, part of the case that Benatar makes for antinatalism is that the quality of life is very bad. Now, obviously, he also makes distinctions about how there's a difference between starting and continuing a life, and the bar for starting a life is very different from continuing a life. What Matty might be trying to do is focusing more on the quality of life argument and asking what implications does that have for euthanasia in this specific instance. But as this specific thought experiment having wider applicability to antinatalism itself, the antinatalist position, to me it doesn't seem to have any real relevance that I can think of. Maybe I'm being ignorant here. It's more a question of death ethics rather than creation ethics. But it's still an interesting thing to tackle or engage with, and it culminated in a discussion with David Benatar, and part of that discussion presumably would have been about whether this relates to antinatalism. So it's good to check all this out in the build-up to watching that discussion.
Although that will make you, technically speaking, a killing extinctionist of the guinea pig species. Good for her, good for all. Case closed.
So that was the end of the first episode.
In a previous episode of Philosophy Matti Has an Issue, I presented the case of Marzipan, the last living guinea pig in the world. I asked, would I, as the last living human being in the world, be permitted to end Marzipan's life on certain specified conditions? The context of my question was David Benatar's 2006 book, Better Never to Have Been. The conditions were that I would myself die soon, and that Marzipan's life after my demise would be miserable. Citing some possibly relevant passages of the book and making some deductions of my own, I concluded that the David Benatar of Better Never to Have Been could have automatically granted me the permission to shorten Marzipan's life. In the discussion that followed, some agreed with me, others had their doubts. I had a...
Yeah, so I must have left a comment under the first video then for me to be mentioned there. What I'll do is we can continue, and I will try and get my comment up and we can read through it.
Assume that no one can be so categorically against shortening lives that they could leave or even consider leaving poor Marzipan to die alone in misery. Some of the commentators shared my assumption, and some of them even believed that Better Never to Have Been would have explicitly and unquestioningly supported the view. How wrong we were. Prompted by the more skeptical comments, I solicited Amanda's help, and together we sifted through the book to refute my original view. And refuted it was, or so I now think. Let me start again from a clean...
Okay, I have found it. So let me just come on to just me for a while. And switch over. Okay, here we are. Okay, I'm not sure why it's doing how it's doing, but here we go. Okay, so this was my comment under the first video. So, hi Matty, perhaps I'm mistaken, but you're assuming the absence of Benatar making claims about the wrongness of killing extinction in the animal context is sufficient to conclude he would believe it is possibly, I think I should have said possibly permissible there. I think it would be better to clarify with him, as I suspect it isn't a safe assumption. In my view, the absence of someone saying they're opposed to something is not a good grounds for assuming they may support it. It may just be that they haven't passed comment. So, yeah, okay. So nothing really that I didn't say in my commentary just then. Right, and back on to the video.
Slate. And explain our main findings and their probable meaning. The connection between killing individuals and making species extinct that I had evoked turned out to be a red herring. Soon after the passages I quoted on the distinction between killing extinction and dying of extinction, a footnote specifies.
Right. So yeah, I hadn't commented on that in the first episode. Sorry. So I think what Matty's referring to there is that the passages from the book he was taking and citing were about extinction, but the thought experiment that he was centering the video around was about an individual case, and those two situations are very different, about whether euthanizing one specific individual is permissible or not, and whether it's permissible to engage on a killing campaign to cause a whole species to go extinct. Yeah, these are two very different situations for many reasons. One of the key ones being that in one case you have one individual, and if there's just one individual and you've had a relationship with them, presumably if they're your pet guinea pig or companion animal guinea pig, then you're going to be relatively sort of familiar with what their basic interests are and maybe the prospects they have in their specific conditions and situation. Whereas, you know, and then you go into the different section. If you go into the other example of killing extinction, you've got a case where there's many individuals, each of them in different circumstances, different situations, different life stages, having different interests, different relationships, stuff like this. And so whilst you may be able to, in some circumstances, say that it's probably in the best interests of this specific individual to euthanize them in a given circumstance, that can't be translated into a general sort of permissibility for killing all of a species. Yeah, or at least you can't take the ethics of that one case and scale it up and times it by the number of individuals in that you would be killing in the killing extinction, because like I said, all of those individuals are going to be different from each other. They're not going to be in the same circumstances that you're basing your base assumptions on around that individual case. But anyway, let's so I think that was what Matty was talking about here, about how this sort of transition from killing individuals to making species extinct via killing, you can't really draw an easier line as maybe he was implying in that first video.
That in the case of non-humans, there has been too much emphasis on the demise of species. The real issue is that individual non-human lives are cut short.
Yes, which I agree with. You know, we humans have this very pervasive tendency to collectivize or focus on the group within which an individual is situated. So we do this in the human context with things like sexism, racism, ageism, whatever your ism is, slap it in there. We focus on the group traits that an individual has rather than the individuality of the individual, right? And we do this with animals as well, right? We so commonly, especially in like the environmental, ecological, conservation world, so often thinking about what is good for a species rather than what is good for an individual, and a very good and easy way and simple way of thinking about how the well-being of an individual is very much detached from the well-being of a species is if you think about the case of a factory farm chicken. Now, the factory farm chicken is perhaps one of the most successful species in the world. They have a different species, i.e. humans, actively putting in the labor to constantly be breeding them so their numbers are, you know, either remaining large or increasing. And so they don't even have to put in the particular effort to pass on their genetic material. That's going to get, you know, humans are facilitating that for them. And there's loads of them. There's loads of these factory farm chickens, right? So as a species, in terms of numbers, it's very healthy, doing very well. But that isn't really the morally relevant lens that we should be looking at that situation through. The morally relevant lens, or the locus of moral concern, is the individual. And if we look at the individual, we know that those chickens are not flourishing. They are not in good health. They are not doing well. So this is a sort of key difference between viewing animals from the species lens and the individual lens, and how actually when we're talking about ethics, the morally relevant lens is to focus on the individual, like it is with the human as well. Cool. Before we continue, just a reminder, please send in your donations. We are 30% of the way to the fundraising goal. If you're enjoying the stream, if you have found my work beneficial, if you generally want to celebrate International Antinatalist Day and try and do some good on this day particularly, then please send in a donation. It will get doubled, so anything you send in will be times 2 and then given to MSI Reproductive Choices. Let's continue.
Individuals is wrong. Now we only have to find out which individuals and why. Not all are equal in this respect. The chapter on the morality of abortion seems to be the best source when it comes to the wrongness of killing in Better Never to Have Been. Benatar discusses several anti-abortion views, including Richard Hare's appeal to the Golden Rule and Don Marquis' idea of a future of value and the immorality of its deprivation. These views are not to David Benatar's liking. His own view is encapsulated in one sentence. Discontinuing the valuable life of a being with morally relevant interests in that life is prima facie wrong. One sentence, but at least 2 distinct messages. That a being has to have morally relevant interests in its life is meant to exclude human embryos and fetuses and to justify abortions. Early humans do not, according to Benatar, have the...
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm misinterpreting Matty's wording there, but I'm not sure if the way that... I mean, I might be wrong, but I'm not sure the way that Benatar would have approached it would be, how can I define this in the way that is going to make these things permissible? It's more, what do I genuinely feel makes this thing bad? And as a consequence of establishing that value, that's why he had, and if those are his genuine values, then that's probably why he then has these downstream views of around abortion and things like this. So yeah, I would say it's actually probably the reverse way round. I might be wrong on that, but that would be my feeling, rather than him defining them as morally relevant interests to justify views on abortion. It's more that they are morally relevant interests, and obviously people are going to quibble about which interests are morally relevant or not. And then downstream from that flows a specific view on abortion.
More advanced interests required for an entitlement to live. He then goes on to argue that terminating early pregnancies would in fact be preferable to continuing them to term. I am recommending that she...
And I believe that's pregnancies before sentience has arisen, because what Benatar does is he presents on abortion the pro-death view, which is basically, it's morally, well, what's the best way to put it? Antinatalists view it as morally wrong to bring sentient beings into existence. If coming into existence happens at the when sentience arises, then aborting a fetus before sentience has arisen is simply fulfilling that negative duty you have under antinatalism to not bring sentient beings into existence.
Pregnant woman early on.
Whereas once the fetus gains sentience, then that's already an individual in existence, and so the calculations change. even then, actually, it isn't really a question for antinatalism. Then you're getting into the ethics of killing an existing life, which is a different question. There may be some underlying fundamental beliefs you have about existence and life that inform both views, but just having an antinatalist view is not going to generate any specific view on the ethics of death and
We
killing.
bring children in this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the, let's go on to here, for the donation to the fundraiser, absolute legend. So that is from Anna. She uses her name, so I think it's fine to say that. So thank you so much for the donation, Anna, absolute legend. Anna says, have you watched Severance? It has some really interesting connections to antinatalism. Without spoilers, people can create a new consciousness inside their minds with thoughts and wants of their own. Two minds sharing one brain at different times. That's interesting. I haven't watched Severance. I have people have recommended it to me. I'm actually in the process of well, to be honest, I don't actually I went through a bit of a phase recently of watching TV series, but I don't actually spend that much time watching TV series. So there's a few TV series that but also me and my partner want to get through, and I just don't spend enough time actually getting through them, but I do need to spend more time doing it. Severance is on there because it has been recommended by a couple of people. But I had no idea that there was any sort of like maybe connection to antinatalism there, or interesting sort of questions or whatever. But I will get round to watching it, and when I get round to watching it, I will look at it from that lens. And if there's enough to talk about, if there's enough to talk about the connection to antinatalism in a video, then I'll do that. One interesting thing though is that actually Matty, who is in the video who did the video that we're reacting to, he actually, I think, co-authored recently a book or a booklet on cloning ethics. And it sounds like what you're saying is it is you're saying create a new consciousness. I don't know if that is if you're like what you're referring to is cloning, or if it's like it's not actually a clone of yourself that then maybe can develop independently of your consciousness, or the original consciousness. I don't know exactly how it works in the universe of Severance, but yeah, this idea of cloning, you know, there are things that antinatalism, I think anyway, would have to say about it. So yeah, that could be an interesting book for people to look at. Yeah, but thank you so much for the donation, absolute legend, and all going to a worthy cause and getting doubled as well. And yes, Severance is on my list, so I will get to it. But thank you so much, Anna, and let's continue.
Aboard, and that she needs excellent reasons not to. Which for now just goes to show that better never to have been is no stranger to killing beings, as long as they are of the killable type. Marzipan, however...
Let me just go back.
to argue that terminating early pregnancies would in fact be preferable to continuing them to term. I am recommending that she, a pregnant woman early on, does abort, and that she needs excellent reasons not to. Which for now just goes to show that better never to have been is no stranger to killing beings, as long as they are of the killable.
So I think there's something slightly to quibble about there, which is that I don't know exactly where Matty is going to take this, because actually I'm not sure if I watched this episode or if I did. It was a while ago, so I'm not remembering. But there might be an equivocation happening here on this idea of killing beings, just because like for a being to be morally relevant, in my understanding, and it seems like in Benatar's understanding, they have to be sentient. And in Better Never to Have Been, the pro-death view is specifically non-sentient fetuses. So in the morally relevant sense, you're not killing a being. Now, maybe someone could argue you are killing a being, it's just not a morally relevant being. So, it would be like if you're washing your hands and killing all the bacteria, you're killing millions of beings. If you're using it in that sense, then yeah, I think that's, I would say it's slightly odd wording, but like it's accurate in terms of the ideas. But I think like that clarity needs to be made there, because what Benatar's talking about is you're terminating a pregnancy or ending the life of a fetus that isn't sentient. And what we need to be careful not to do is equivocate on using that as a sort of reason to think that Better Never to Have Been is justifying killing morally relevant beings, like sentient beings as well. Maybe Matty isn't going to do that. I can't remember exactly where this video goes, but let's continue.
Type. Marzipan, however, does not.
And we have
children in this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much we have had from John H. We have had a donation come in of $20, absolute legend. So it came through a super chat, which is legendary. Thank you so much, John, for the donation. And it will still be going towards MSI Reproductive Choices. It's not going to show up on the progress bar, so we will be further along the way on the progress bar, but it's just not showing up because it's a super chat. But absolute legend, thank you so much. And John says this: I'm not sanguine about the prospects for antinatalism ever becoming widely accepted, but it's still the right and decent way, and even if it ultimately only stops a handful of unnecessary existences, it's totally worth promoting. Exactly. I understand, like, there are a lot of very, like, empathetic people out there who want everyone's problems, all the world's problems, to be solved. And antinatalism seems like this very fundamental thing, and it is a very fundamental thing. And I know that a lot of people I've come across have had this motivation to want, or this desire to want antinatalism to solve all the world's problems. And it's not going to, in two senses, one theoretical sense and one practical sense. The theoretical sense is that antinatalism is just about moral agents not creating moral patients, sentient beings. So even if that happened and we lived in an antinatalist world, well, we wouldn't live, well, we may live in a sentient world until we died, but antinatalist world. But even if humans went extinct, we stopped breeding animals, there would still be problems in the world, because there would be other animals that breed amongst themselves. So antinatalism is not this, like, I don't think there is some perfect solution we're going to come across and be able to implement in any way. But antinatalism definitely isn't one. It is just in my view, like morally correct, if that's such a word, view. Just like standing up, in opposition to sexual assault or something like this. Like, yes, we should be against sexual assault. Even if all sexual assault went away, that wouldn't solve all the world's problems. It would just remove one problem from the world. The practical thing is, of course, like, antinatalism is never going to actually, like, properly catch on in the way that we would want, obviously. So that's, in a practical sense, why it's not going to solve all the world's problems. But despite all that, yes, for us as individuals, we should be behaving in a way that we understand to be ethical or moral. And antinatalism should be part of that. So yes, I agree with you, John. It's not going to solve all the world problems, very unfortunately. But us as individuals, we should still act in accordance with what we understand to be moral, and that's antinatalism. So we shouldn't be creating any humans. We shouldn't be paying industries to breed animals into existence, all of this sort of stuff. And like John is, hopefully we can also, I think we should, as much as we can, try and do some good in the world as well. And we've just had another one
to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much to the person who brought that one in. They have brought the total up to now about £70, which is going to be 140 plus John's one. So we're probably over £150 now, which is amazing. Thank you so much, Legend. There was no message with that one, but you're a top G anyway. Thank you so much. You know who you are. Cool. Thank you so much. Let's keep going.
Not belong to the same category with human.
Okay, let me just rewind.
A pregnant woman early on does abort, and that she needs excellent reasons not to. Which for now just goes to show that better never to have been is no stranger to killing beings, as long as they are of the killable type. Marzipan, however, does not belong to the same category with human embryos, which means that unless proven otherwise, I would be discontinuing the valuable life of a being with morally relevant interests in that life. Some of my commentators have called this the deprivation view, and it is now duly noted. There could be a way out of this, in Marzipan's favor I believe, but enough of me for now. What do you think?
So that's the end of episode 2, I think. And then this is episode 3, which is the last episode before the discussion.
My chronicles involving Marzipan, the last guinea pig in the world, are approaching their conclusion. After some trial and error, I now know what I think David Benatar said in his Better Never to Have Been about beginning and ending the lives and deaths of living beings, human, sentient or otherwise. My background story has been that I am the last human being.
I think if you wanted to understand what Benatar thought of killing beings, I think a better book to have done this with would have been The Human Predicament rather than Better Never to Have Been. Because in The Human Predicament, he talks a lot more about death from my memory. Again, I don't have it all in my memory verbatim, but I think it probably would have been a better book.
Alive, and my life is coming to its end. I have a dear animal companion, Marzipan, who is in good health, but would probably spend the rest of her life in misery after I'm gone. The question has been, would the David Benatar of 2006 permit me to end Marzipan's life before I go? I first thought that the answer is obvious. Of course, any compassionate person would allow me to spare the poor thing from the impending misery. But then, prompted by some of your comments, I made further inquiries, and it transpired that I could be wrongfully taking a life after all. And that's where we are now. The answer is in the box or in the book, but which one is it? For now, Marzipan seems to be both dead and alive. As predicted at the end of episode 2, pages 218 and 219 solve the case for me. First this, life can be so bad that it is better to die. And then on the next page, thus I think that death is sometimes a harm and sometimes a benefit. And that's all I needed after my preliminary investigations to set the variables in place for my next task. As many of you have anticipated, my chronicles here do have a point beyond the death or not of a guinea pig, as fond as I have grown of her during the proceedings. Contrary to what some of you seem to have feared, however, Marzipan is not a Trojan horse for smuggling in any normative views concerning lives and deaths and their continuation or discontinuation on a larger scale. Instead, I'm concerned about interpretations. With what I think I know about Better Never to Have Been, my question is, how can its message be interpreted? So, let's cast our minds back to 2006. We have just read the book and we are especially interested in the rightness and wrongness of making lives appear and disappear. What we know is that this is a balancing act. Life is always bad, and being dead according to the book is always bad. But death can be less bad than life, and in this case making life disappear can be good. Let's consider the possibilities, starting from what we think about marzipan and proceeding to what might logically follow from our position and with what kinds of additional assumptions. To begin with, let's consider those who don't allow taking the guinea pig's life in my imaginary case. Their view could be based on the idea, possibly to be deduced from Better Never to Have Been, that taking lives is only allowed on the explicit request of those whose lives are taken. Benatar states that he allows voluntary euthanasia, so the admission is necessary. Nothing in this view prevents its champions from advocating voluntary childlessness. No one is killed in decisions not to have offspring. Interestingly, since Benatar emphasizes the extension to all sentient beings, this view is quite naturally coupled with vegan abolitionism. If one is opposed to human births, the breeding going on in factory farming cannot be seen as such a great practice either. Even more interestingly, those who want marzipan to live through her misery might still defend the sterilization of non-human animals in the wild. No one would be killed, yet the activity could prevent a considerable amount of suffering, which after all seems to be among Benatar's main goals.
Yeah, so I mean, in my general view, I don't think that naturally follows from antinatalism. I think you have to couple it with other views to get to the conclusion that it would be morally permissible to sterilize wild animals or certain wild animals, and yes, some people kind of get confused about what I think about this. Like I do think the use of contraception in wildlife interventions can be justified in at least some cases. You know, there are several cases I can think of now that I think it would be very justified in using. So one example is if you technically these are liminal animals, but if you look at the population of rats in New York, so the New York I might even make a video on this, but the New York local government have given the green light to exploring a scheme of using contraceptives to regulate rat populations, rather than this boom and bust cycle of their population going up and killing them and then going up and killing them, which I think is massively positive for many reasons, but also from an antinatalist view, right? I don't think that being an antinatalist necessarily gets you to the view of thinking it's good to intervene in the lives of rat populations and using contraceptives there. But if you're an antinatalist and you have the other relevant views that would combine to generate the condonement of that action, then from that specific antinatalist perspective, it would be a good thing. And at least from any antinatalist perspective, it would be a good thing that those new rats wouldn't be coming into existence. It's just they may not think that the means are justified. I think they would be justified, but some antinatalists maybe wouldn't. But I at least want to recognize that that is not a universal antinatalist view, which is why I'm bringing it up here. Like, I think that this intervention into the lives of wild animals is sufficiently linked, because there are antinatalist motivations to want to maybe do that, but it's sufficiently distinct to not be considered antinatalism itself. But I am motivated to support that for antinatalist reasons, but I realize other antinatalists won't be. But let's continue. Remember, if you have not already, or you have some more money to go, then please donate to the fundraiser. Everything will be doubled. Everything's going to Marie Stopes' International Reproductive Choices, MSI Reproductive Choices. All go into an amazing cause, and everything getting doubled. So get your donations in. We are, with John's super chat, we are over 50% now. I don't know exactly where we are over 50% because the super chat doesn't go in the bar. But if you can get us all the way to 100%, then you're an absolute legend. Let's see those donations come in. Thank you so much for those who have donated and those who are going to donate.
Anyway, at the other end of the continuum, we find those who do allow the shortening of marzipan's life in my example. Their primary motivations are probably compassion and a duty of care. As practical measures, they would promote voluntary childlessness, veganism, and maybe wildlife sterilization, like anyone abiding by Benatar's rules. But what else? To find out, let's take a look at what makes the case of my imaginary guinea pig analogical to real-life endeavors. Which features in the guinea pig case are normatively relevant? Sentience, for those who oppose hastening marzipan's death, serves as a distinguishing factor. Benatar advocates early abortions, hence the killing of beings without an interest in their own lives. The case of the guinea pig is different. The major factor in this camp is that the lack of explicit outspoken consent forbids life-taking. The relational other regarding factors of compassion and duty of care are in this view something that can be ignored. These principles and choices may or may not be expressed word by word in Better Never to Have Been, but at least my knowledge of the book doesn't preclude them. If they are someone's reading, then they are. Not mine, but that's neither here nor there. The main motivation on the other side is probably the idea that sentience calls for compassion past autonomy, beyond the ability to say, put me out of my misery. If they suffer, we help them not to suffer. An accidental, I didn't plan it, but significant feature in my case is that marzipan is not suffering yet. She is healthy and happy, while I'm taking care of her and keeping her company. It's the reasonably expected misery after I'm gone that justifies her induced demise. Two further principles are needed to support the decision to shorten her life. First, I have to be responsible for her, and I think I am because of a legal idea that goes by the name of the but-for rule. And secondly, omissions, decisions not to do things, must be normatively in the same category with acts, decisions to actively do something. These two principles need a little explanation. The but-for notion of responsibility states that if I have causally and intentionally contributed to it, I am, maybe with others but still, responsible for it. But for my choice, it would not have been, means that I too am responsible for it. and applied to our case. But for my insistence on having a non-human companion, Marzipan would not have been. So, I'm responsible for her. I have a duty of care to her. The equivalence of acts and omissions principle states that from a normative point of view, it doesn't matter if I contribute to something by making it happen or by letting it happen. When I know the consequences and intend them, I am responsible for them. I am not acquitted by the fact that I just refused to prevent harm, as in I stood back and allowed her to die in misery. Now, if those are our convictions, what does better never to have been tell us to do? The things already mentioned are given: voluntary childlessness, veganism, and maybe wildlife sterilizations. But there could be more. Preemptive wildlife care, meaning that since there is so much suffering out there, perhaps we should wipe out insentient species to hasten the process. And while we are at it, humans could, not against their will, but not necessarily asking the explicit permission either, be helped to reduce their birth rates. Perhaps contraceptives to all and reproduction only by licensing would be relatively acceptable.
I didn't quite follow. I'm actually blocking them with where I am, but the point that's literally just here, it says preemptive wildlife care. And I think Matty mentioned wiping out insentient species now, presumably so they don't become sentient, and he's analogizing that sort of like
we bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the donation. This is £30, which boosts us up to basically, well, we are over £100 because of John's super chat. Absolute legend whoever sent this one in. I have no idea who it is. They didn't include their name and it's anonymous. But they say, Lawrence, you gained 3,000 subscribers over the last year. Gives me hope to see the community grow. Keep up the great work, you legend. Thank you so much. You're also a legend. Your £30 is going to get doubled into £60. So going through MSI Reproductive Choices, you can expect to be preventing some pregnancies. So top legend, top lad, top gal, whichever you are. Yeah, thank you so much. And also thank you for following the channel and watching my stuff. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Top legend. So I was saying about how, yeah, this sort of link from fulfilling a negative duty to well, okay, let me try and explain it how I'm understanding it. So Matty's talking about how in Better Never to Have Been, you have, if someone's pregnant, if a woman is pregnant, you have she has an insentient fetus inside of her. Terminating that pregnancy is going to be fulfilling her negative duty under antinatalism, because you're preventing a being from coming into existence. You're not bringing a being into existence. Once the fetus becomes sentient, then you'd be killing. It's not antinatalism anymore. It's a separate question, blah, blah, blah. Now, I think what Matty's doing is he's saying the same basic dynamics apply if you take into account the but for and omission principles, because if you have insentient species, even though those insentient species that are around now are not around as a result of us, right? If you say that there's a potential for them to develop so that they are sentient, like the fetus developing into a sentient fetus, and you appreciate the omission principle, so that you know, us just leaving these species to maybe eventually develop into sentient beings is basically the same as us like acting to do it. If maybe I'm getting mixed up in my head, but basically that would just mean, and given the but for principle, we would be basically responsible for that. Given we had the opportunity to nip the insentience in the bud, if it does end up developing into sentience, that's basically on us. And that would be us not fulfilling a negative duty we have, because we would be responsible for that. So that is essentially us facilitating sentient beings coming into existence. So, like terminating a non-sentient fetus, we should maybe, he's suggesting, go and kill insentient life so it can't evolve later. I can understand the sort of links he's making there. In practice, they are obviously slightly different. Like, if you're just looking in the abstract in terms of ideas, I can understand the links he's making. But in practice, they seem like pretty different situations. In one instance, you've got a insentient fetus, which we know is pretty immediately going to become sentient. Like, we can be very sure it's going to become sentient at some point, and pretty soon. And that's not analogous with the case of there being many, many beings out there that are insentient. We have no idea if they would actually develop sentience. Maybe some of them would, maybe they wouldn't. We have like no idea. And this is not like a very like immediate issue that we have a good understanding of, like the case of the fetus. The other thing is, if you terminate the fetus, this fetus is not immersed in some sort of complex web of interactions and dependencies like many insentient species are. So there are many insentient species that play a part in global ecosystems and relationships with humans and other animals and all this sort of stuff. And some of them impact sentient beings negatively, some are neutral, some of them impact them positively. Just going and wiping out all of those insentient species, in practice, this is, I mean, one, going to be very hard, but also it's going to have all sorts of ramifications that could be extremely negative. Like there will probably be some positives as well, because there will be insentient species that cause harm to sentient beings. But it's, I mean, I'm sure Matty would say, we should do this in a considered way and all of this sort of stuff, etc., etc. But I'm just saying in terms of like the sort of basic ethical dynamics of it, the morally relevant dynamics here, doing that sort of thing is going to cause way more down the line consequences than terminating a fetus is going to. And that's also disanalogous. That's not me necessarily saying you shouldn't do that. Like that's not really the point I'm getting at here either way, whether you should or should not do that. I'm just trying to sort of parse out the difference between what I think Matty is basing this on and the difference between that and where this sort of speculative view is going. And I think, like I said, whilst I can see in the abstract maybe the links he's making, in practice they seem like very different scenarios. But yeah, I mean, if someone asked me, could we live in a world where, everything else is equal, the insentient beings are removed, everything else stays the same, but we remove those insentient beings and it removes the risk of them ever becoming sentient, like, yeah, that seems like it would be a good thing to do to me. But yeah, obviously a lot of water is being carried in that sentence by all else being equal, which it isn't in reality. But let's continue.
No coercion, of course. What I'm trying to say here is simply that many interpretations are logically possible. Let me summarize the findings of my imaginary case by an imaginary review that I could have written in 2006 had I read the book back then. David Benatar presents a modern version of philosophical pessimism based on the view that both life and death are serious harms to be avoided. His detailed analysis supports a variety of normative conclusions ranging from voluntary childlessness to veganism and the obliteration of life on Earth and beyond.
His detailed analysis supports a variety of normative conclusions ranging from voluntary childlessness, agree, to veganism, agree, and the obliteration of life on Earth and beyond. I don't agree with that. And I'm also not sure that... I'm not even sure that was in discussion in the videos we've just watched. Maybe I've just completely missed an element of the videos we've just watched, but I'm not even sure that was a conclusion that Matty was drawing, and it's now just popped up here. Let me just quickly go back. Yeah, I'm not even sure, because yeah, here it's... yeah, I thought he was just talking about insentient rather than sentient, but
serious harm.
Anyway, this sort of stuff will get cleared up in the discussion that we're going to get to. So let's just get through this and get to the discussion.
To be avoided. His detailed analysis supports a variety of normative conclusions ranging from voluntary childlessness to veganism and the obliteration of life on Earth and beyond. Were this antinatal, his incidental coinage, ethics ever discussed further, which for its esoteric nature I doubt, it could easily give rise to conflicting interpretations. And that's all from me for now. It only remains to say thank you and P.S. Many of you have hoped to hear what David Benatar himself has to say about these things now, 20 years later. Your wish being my command, I have asked him if he'd be willing to do this. He is understandably busy, but has agreed to consider it if there is sufficient demand. To show him that there is, you can express your support by giving a thumbs up in the first comment box below. No doubt he will tear apart my feeble attempts, but hey, all in a day's work can't win them all, and what have you. Can't wait.
So now we are going to get on to the discussion. So, yeah, so Matty did those 3 episodes, and then obviously enough people liked that comment that Benatar came on and had a discussion with Matty, and that's what we're going to watch now. It's about half an hour. One thing I will say is I haven't watched it. I was saving it for this. So yeah, I'm going to be reacting to this discussion. The only thing I would say, just as a general impression, is I understand what Matty was doing was looking specifically at Benatar's work in Better Never to Have Been, and whether there can be reasonable interpretations of that move towards this idea of like intervening into the lives of wild animals or specific animals, ending their lives, and then the total annihilation of life on Earth and beyond, basically ethylism. And I understand that's what he was doing in this video, but I'm actually not sure that's the most fruitful way to go about this. I think if one wants to explore whether antinatalist views can or do lead to more wide-ranging implications for those sorts of things, for ethylist sort of things, if someone wants to make that case, then I think they should just kind of make that case in general, rather than trying to look at a specific book and what one specific individual would say. I'd be interested. I don't know if Matty is thinking about doing this, but I would be interested to hear what Matty maybe thinks of the disconnections of the sort of differences between antinatalism and ethylism that I explored in my video on ethylism. I have no idea if that is something he's thought of doing. I also see you're watching, Matty. I know you've been putting messages in the chat, but I haven't been checking the chat properly, so I have not been keeping up with messages. But if you're considering that would be interesting. I'd be interested in hearing, general thought trying to bridge this gap between antinatalism and ethylism. Not particularly because I want there to be a gap, just because I'm interested in that. I believe there is actually quite a wide divide conceptually between the two in how I understand them, which I've gone over in my video. But if someone thinks I'm wrong, and I know there are people that think I'm wrong, and they think actually maybe the gap is smaller, or maybe there's a bridge rather than a gap, I'd be interested to hear that case. So yeah, if anyone wants to make that case, please do, and then send it to me so I can consider it. I'm definitely not saying that I would necessarily agree. From what I know so far, I would probably still disagree. But if someone puts a very good case forward, then I'm perfectly open to hearing it. But yeah, Louis saying chatting the check, yeah. But yeah, I think yeah, approaching it from a more general, zoomed out, conceptual point, like reference from that perspective, I think is to me that seems more fruitful. But obviously, it's your time and effort to do with as you like. But let's have a watch of this one. Just as a reminder, please continue donating to the fundraiser. We are over halfway, well over halfway. Let's get to £150 and yeah, then double it and get it all sent off to MSI Reproductive Choices. Cool. Let's go.
In this episode of Philosophy Matti Interviews, my guest is David Benata, the author of books such as Better Never to Have Been, The Human Predicament, and Very Practical Ethics, known as the founder of contemporary antinatalism. On the Exploring Antinatalism podcast channel, he needs no further introduction. Happy to have you here, David. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
Your 2006 book, Better Never to Have Been, is important to the international community of antinatalists. It is for many the first and for some the only academic source to the philosophy and theory of this way of thinking. Different people have, however, interpreted the book differently. One notable difference that I've seen has been in how the role of killing, taking lives deliberately and intentionally, is seen. Some think that no killing is allowed, others that the whole range of exceptions is possible. To seek clarity to this issue, I formulated an imaginary case. You have seen my short videos on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast channel, my Marzipan Chronicles. The story there is that I'm the last human being alive, I'm dying soon, and my guinea pig companion Marzipan, also the last of her species, although in good health now, would predictably live and die in misery without me. So my question to you is, would you and would Better Never to Have Been permit me to kill Marzipan, and on what considerations would the verdict be based on?
Thank you. Well, I think that the question you've posed in that video and now summarized is somewhat tangential to what I'm dealing with in Better Never to Have Been. I can explain why, but perhaps I should first of all say that I can't remember exactly what I've said in that book as distinct from other places. And I know that some of what has preoccupied you is the question about what I, in my incarnation in that book, would say about this particular problem. So given this difficulty that I have in separating up what I've said there and what I've said elsewhere, I may just speak more generally. But from what I can recall, the question that you've raised is, I think, tangential to the content of the book. The book is really about procreation. It has implications for extinction. And in speaking about extinction, I've spoken about two different ways in which that can be brought about. The one is through not creating new lives, and the other is by killing existing lives. And so when I deal with extinction through killing, I'm really dealing with killing in the context of extinction. And in general, I'm opposed to bringing extinction about by way of killing beings. The case that you present is a case in which the guinea pig species will become extinct as a result of my killing marzipan if I do decide to kill marzipan. But I don't think that the decision to be made there is primarily one about extinction. It's primarily about the well-being of marzipan. As I understand the way you've described this case, marzipan is fine at the moment and will continue to be fine after I die. But at some further point in the future, she's going to suffer very badly if I don't euthanize her before I die. And so what I take this to be is really a case of euthanasia, but not in the paradigmatic sense where we are now or imminently dealing with a being whose life is so bad that death would be the lesser of two evils. Instead, we're dealing about a much more enhanced prophylactic kind of euthanasia, where you're killing now to prevent a great deal of suffering in the further future. And that, I think, does present special difficulties. So let me leave it there for now and see if you have anything to say about the way I've set up this problem.
Yes, we can for.
Yeah, I think like the main thing I've taken from that is that this whole question is very much tangential to the wider topic of creation ethics. So yeah, let's continue.
For all I care, we can forget about extinction here, because I did find out in my chronicles in the second part that although you make the distinction between killing extinction and dying of extinction, and apply it only to humans and not explicitly to non-humans and blah blah blah, I on the next page I found that you are not that concerned about the species dying, even in the case of non-human animal death, but you are more interested in their death and the badness of that. As for your euthanasia plan, and I'm sort of reading that you might go along with that. I'm happy to see that you agree with yourself or your artificial intelligence representation, David Benatar's philosophy guide. I asked them the same question and received essentially the same answer that you are giving between the lines. Noting that you don't explicitly discuss a case like this in Better Never to Have Been, the bot concluded that your broader ethical framework is likely to morally permit, if not endorse, that was added by the bot, the preemptive euthanasia of marzipan as a means of preventing future suffering. Good for the designers of the bot, I'm sure. Perhaps the closest that you come to this case in the book is abortion. You argue that human...
Yeah, this AI bot that Matty is talking about, I'm aware of it, but I've not actually used it. Yeah, I don't really have too much information on that, to be honest. I don't know if anyone in the chat watching has used it at all, and what they've used it for. But yeah, I'm not really that familiar with it. I'm aware of it, but not really familiar with it.
Embryos and fetuses already in some kind of existence should be aborted before they acquire an interest in their own lives. And you go on to argue that some late-term abortions of the development of consciousness and even some instances of infanticide may be morally desirable if they prevent the continuation of particularly unpleasant existences. I'm trying to establish the proper boundaries of the legitimacy of killing here, really. So my question to you is, are the moral justifications that you would use the same or the different in the cases of abortion and infanticide on the one hand, and euthanizing marzipan on the other hand, if you go ahead and allow marzipan to be euthanized?
So my main quibble with the framing of this question is that abortion and infanticide are put on one hand, but they're actually very different things. Well, at least abortion in terms of the abortion Benatar was talking about in the book, because that is a killing or the ending of a life, or however you want to put it, of a non-sentient fetus. So that's preventing a being from coming into existence, whereas later abortions and infanticide would be killing a sentient being. Now, if that is done with the same sort of considerations as euthanizing marzipan, then that would be more analogous. But I just want to separate that from the other type of abortion, which is the preventing a being from coming into existence. So let's see what Benatar says.
I think if we're speaking about abortion prior to the emergence of sentience, then we're speaking about preventing a being from coming into existence. And that would
Yeah, so yeah, he's making this distinction as well.
be unlike the case of marzipan, because marzipan as a sentient being already exists as a sentient being. And so that's not a case, killing her was not a case of preventing her existence. It's preventing a continued existence. In other words, killing her. So it's not like abortion through most of pregnancy. Once we're speaking about a sentient fetus, or a fortiori a neonate, now we're speaking about terminating a life. And so then I think the question is whether continued existence is worse than death, or the other way around. Now, in most cases where we are thinking about euthanasia of neonates, for example, we're thinking about beings who are now suffering very badly. And so the decision is in some sense easier in those cases. It's still not easy, because these are very difficult questions to answer. I mean, in part because there's more than one component question. One component question is, how bad is the suffering from the subjective point of view? And that's often hard to determine. It's often hard to get into the mind of another being, even if it's a human baby, but even more so if it's of another species. It's hard to get into the mind. And another question to ask is, well, how bad is death? And that's a whole nother question that people can disagree about. Some people think that death is not bad at all for merely sentient beings. I actually think that death is pretty bad for merely sentient beings. But that's another component question. And then you've got to put these together in order to work out whether death is in the overall interests or against the overall interests of the being.
We bring children
The marzipan
in this world,
case is
and
so
we raise them to be warriors against evil.
Thank you so much for the donation. Absolute legend. I won't share who they were because they don't include their name. But we have another donation come in which has tipped us over the 100-point mark on the counter, although we do have John's super chat, so we were over 100 already. But thank you so much for that donation. So this donor says, I'm a maniac and just couldn't deal with not moving the bloody progress bar. Thank you so much. We all love maniacs like that. Hopefully there's some more maniacs in the chat like that. So if you want to get this progress bar moved along, please do donate some more. Whatever you can donate, even if it's £1, £2, £10, £20, whatever, you know, large or small, all donations are welcome. And yeah, all donations are doubled, all going to MSI Reproductive Choices. So thank you so much for the person who sent in that donation, and everyone else who's watching, please send in your donations. Let's continue with the video.
Further complicated, because she's fine now and she will be for the foreseeable future. And that's a problem in itself, but it also introduces a further problem, and that is how in the real world I would know that her end was going to be so bad.
Yes, your bot used the term preemptive euthanasia, which was kind of surprising to me. But I do get your point that early abortion is the odd one out here, because that's when sentience hasn't set in. Then late abortion and infanticide and marzipan are similar in that sentience case anyway. Well, at this point, it might be useful to make a distinction. Now, early human abortion, late human abortion, human infanticide, and non-human euthanasia may in some instances be morally justified, but they do not necessarily fall under your definition of antinatalism, of course. In our definition panel last year, and I think that better never to have been, did.
If you want to check out that definition panel, then go to the Exploring Antinatalism podcast channel. It's on there. Matty was on that. David Benatar was on that. I was on that as well. So yeah, interesting panel. Go check it out. We're talking basically about, what is the definition of antinatalism that we would like to see, become the prevalent definition, or should be in a dictionary or something like that.
Sort of imply this. You said antinatalism, noun, is the view that it is morally wrong to bring sentient beings into existence. And this gives rise to some follow-up questions on and around the marzipan case. To begin with, is any of the cases discussed so far antinatalism? I mean, early abortion may be the best candidate as it prevents the emergence of sentience and hence all and any pain that could be experienced in the future by the being whose life is terminated. But then the being, without pain but nonetheless, has already been brought into some kind of existence. And I wonder if you could help me out here conceptually. So my question is, how can this case, early human abortion, best be understood as an instance of antinatalism or something else?
Well, the way you just summarized the question seems different from the question that I thought you were asking in the lead up to the summary. So let me deal with the way you formulated towards the end first, and then I'll come to the other. The antinatalism doesn't, I think, imply a particular view about early abortions. As I say in the book, or at least as I recall saying in the book, you have to combine antinatalism with some view about when somebody comes into existence in a morally relevant way. If you combine antinatalism with the view that conception is the time when somebody comes into existence in a morally relevant way, then no abortions amount to preventing somebody from existing. All abortions would then amount to killing somebody. If, on the other hand, you take the view that I happen to take, which is that we come into existence in a morally relevant way when we become sentient, then if you combine that with antinatalism, then we ought to abort in the early stages because we're actually preventing a being from coming into existence rather than from terminating a being. But this is not the question I thought you were asking in the lead up to the summary of the question. I thought you were asking, well, really, what's the relevance of antinatalism to the case of marzipan? And that brings me back to the opening remarks that I made, which is I don't think there's a connection here. I think the question you're posing to me about marzipan, that case, that dilemma, is really not distinctively antinatalist at all. I don't think that what divides people here is going to be whether they're antinatalists or not. I think what's going to divide people here...
Before Benatar gets into that, I think one reason that people often perceive these cases as maybe having some relation to antinatalism is because they're confusing antinatalism with philosophical pessimism and this generally bleak view of existence. And, you know, like, whilst I think those things should be passed apart conceptually, I can kind of understand why there's a confusion, because much of the antinatalist view, and when I say that, I mean, like, if you talk to antinatalists, most of them will probably fall into the category of philosophical pessimists. And so it's very easy to sort of confuse antinatalism for philosophical pessimism because there is very much an overlap embodied in antinatalists. And so sometimes maybe people blur the lines conceptually to where does philosophical pessimism start and begin, and where does antinatalism start and begin, or where does philosophical pessimism finish and antinatalism begin, sort of thing. And because conceptually in many people's minds there's this blurring and a sort of lack of understanding between where philosophical pessimism finishes and where antinatalism begins, they can maybe then, in their minds, antinatalism bleeds into other ethical issues that a philosophically pessimistic view will inform. So let me give an example here, because maybe I'm sort of being incoherent. So you have a let me bring myself back onto the what's it. So you have a view like antinatalism, and that is founded on philosophical pessimism, like this, right? So philosophical pessimism is its own thing, and antinatalism is a view that can branch out of it if someone is so inclined, right? But sometimes the sort of difference between those things can get blurred in someone's mind conceptually. Now, someone may have another separate view which is also based on philosophical pessimism, and maybe that can get sort of blurred with philosophical pessimism. And so if both the antinatalist view and this other view are informed by philosophical pessimism, like, for example, the view that life is actually very bad and suffering pervades, from that you can generate your antinatalist view, and you've also generated another view about, you know, maybe the permissibility of killing. But because you've sort of blurred both into philosophical pessimism, and you're not fully passing out, you know, or appropriately passing out the sort of conceptualization of this, or the conceptuals of each view, your understanding of antinatalism and the ethics of killing are also becoming blurred, because everything is maybe becoming sort of like this sort of mess in the wash of philosophical pessimism. I'm not saying that is the case in all instances, but I'm just saying that sort of, when I sort of hear people speak, that sort of strikes me as being the case often at the time. And maybe that's what's sort of leading to these questions being generated. I don't know, but yeah, I often find that, yeah, people try to link antinatalism to other things and lack an appreciation for the fact that you have to couple other views together to get these other things, or they may just not have a relation to antinatalism really much at all. It's just that both share philosophical pessimism, but you perceive that as being a relationship between antinatalism and this other view, but it's actually that they both just share an element of philosophical pessimism informing them. That was a fucking rant.
Are the other questions that I enumerated, namely, how bad is death for marzipan? And then there's the point about the preemptiveness. Funny that the bot, I want to hear more about this bot in due course, but I have used that term before, maybe not in print, but I have used the term of preemptive euthanasia. So I do see this as a case of preemptive euthanasia, and there'd be questions around the challenges of that. But I don't think that's got anything to do with antinatalism.
Yes, the case of marzipan is not a case of antinatalism as such, and I agree with you in there. Now, as a word of explanation, I am, as you well know, I'm an applied ethicist and a bioethicist. So when we talk about unconscious violinists in hospital beds being kidnapped during the night to save some other people's life, we are of course talking about abortion. And when we are talking about nieces drowned in a bathtub, we are of course talking about euthanasia. So we are always talking about something else. My apologies for that one. I think that in this question I understand your train of thought, but it sounds a little complicated, and maybe my confusion here stems from the fact that better never to have been for me has always been a combination of three interrelated but separate things. Deep pessimism.
Okay, so maybe actually this is what I'm just talking about. Matty's saying because there's this amalgamation of views and one of them is pessimism, that's maybe giving rise to this confusion.
View that life and death are both bad. Human and sentient extinctionism, the view that it would be better if humanity became extinct. That's what somebody says in the back cover. And my argument applies not only to humans, but also to all other sentient beings. That's what you said on page 2. And then the third thing is emerging antinatalism, the view that people should not have children, obviously, but what, if anything, else? And my question to you before we go back to Marzipan and her friends is, looking back now, in your judgment, was better never to have been a treatise on pessimism or extinctionism or antinatalism or a combination thereof or something else altogether?
I think it's a treatise primarily on antinatalism, but I think that a pessimistic view about the quality of human life is a central part of the argument for that conclusion. And then extinctionism is an implication of the antinatalist conclusion.
All right, thank you. So returning to...
Let me just go back and listen to that again.
Of the antinatalist conclusion. Primarily on antinatalism, but I think that a pessimistic view about the quality of human life is a central part of the argument for that conclusion. And then extinctionism is an implication of the antinatalist conclusion.
All right, thank you. So returning to Marzipan and her kind, she is a non-human created by humans and in human care. We have established here, I believe, that I'm more...
Just as a reminder, get your donations in. We still have, well, with John's super chat, we've maybe still got around sort of like £30 to go, but it would be really nice to get to the £150 on the tracker itself, so that we can say we got to 100% on the tracker and fill that bar up with full green. So get in there with your donations. They are much appreciated, and they will be doubled, and they're all going to MSI Reproductive Choices.
Permitted probably to kill her, if by doing so I can prevent a particularly unpleasant future existence that makes it sort of similar to the infanticide and late abortion cases. Now, that, according to your definition, is probably not a paradigmatic case of antinatalism, but the fact that she shouldn't exist in the first place is, no question about it. If it's morally wrong to bring sentient beings into existence, it is morally wrong to create companion and production animals to fulfill human desires, which seems to make Better Never to have been a strong declaration not only against human reproduction, but also against factory farming, animal husbandry, and the non-human pet market. Why am I seeing things in the wrong light here somehow? The question to you is Better Never to have been an ode to vegan abolitionism?
Not explicitly, but I'm not denying that there are connections there. So I certainly do think that it is wrong to bring animals into being in order to kill them and eat them. But it's sort of overdetermined here, because it would be wrong to create them in the first place on the ordinary antinatalist grounds. And then when you couple that with the quality of life, the tremendously poor quality of life that they have, the harm just gets increased significantly. I think similarly about creating companion animals, but there's often a complexity in companion animals, because at least some people are adopting companion animals that already exist. And when they do that, let's say from a pound. And
if people want to see my sort of general thoughts on this and an exploration of companion animals and their reproduction from an antinatalist view, then check out one of my recent videos on, I think it's called "Why Dogs Shouldn't Have Kids" or something like that. But just go on my recent videos, and you'll see there's it's a video with a dog in the thumbnail. And also, if you go to my playlists tab, there's an animals in antinatalism tab, and it's also in there.
Case of dogs, an animal shelter, what they're actually doing is not creating a being, and they've had no part in creating the being, but they are playing a part in preventing the early death of that being. And because I take death to be bad for animals as well, I think they're actually doing something good for the animal. Now, I'm a little worried that your summary earlier suggests that I've already agreed that killing marzipan is okay, and I've not done that. I think if marzipan was suffering unspeakably now, then euthanizing her would be the right thing to do. But the fact that she's going to lead a normal life for a significant period and then succumb to suffering makes this harder, because the justification for euthanasia is not merely on the basis that at some point in the future somebody's going to suffer unbearably, because then we could just go around euthanizing piles of children now, because in 80 years' time they might suffer the horrors of cancer, let's say, and die. And I'm not committed to that. And in ordinary cases, we don't need to be committed to that, because you just put up with life for now until it gets to the point where it is no longer bearable. And in many cases, you will then be dealing with a competent being who's able to make that judgment for themselves. Even in the case of companion animals, though, you don't euthanize your puppy on the day you get your puppy. You try to give your puppy the best life possible. And then if you need to make the decision down the line to terminate the dog's life because that's in its overall interest, you do so. What's difficult about the marzipan case is that you've got this one last window in which you can form the so-called euthanasia in order to prevent the suffering down the line. And that is a very difficult case. If you ask my intuitions on this, I'm likely to say that you wouldn't be justified in killing marzipan unless that suffering were fairly imminent.
And if the suffering were fairly imminent, then you would justify it?
I think you could make a case for it, yes. It's often difficult, even if you think about human cases, because what's happening now with the legalization of assisted dying for humans is there's some jurisdictions where people have not reached the point at which they would actually like to die, but they realize that if they continue much longer, they'll no longer be afforded the opportunity to gain assistance. So these are jurisdictions, for example, where if you have mental degeneration, but you pass the point where you're no longer competent to make decisions, then you can no longer get the assistance. And so what people are forced into is a choice whereby they seek to have their lives ended before they've reached the point that they would ideally like to die, because if they don't make the decision now, they'll be deprived of that decision later. So that's the sort of closest analogy I would get in in the human case. And those are real dilemmas.
Yeah, and even in that case, that's a decision that someone's making for themselves. So, like, it's tricky in that case, and they're making it for themselves. Whereas in the marzipan case, it's one being making the decision for another being. And it's another being that you can, like, when it comes to another human, and I think Benatar already said this, like, when it comes to another human, you can make you can often make, like, reasonable sort of guesses, educated guesses as to how much maybe pain they're going through, you know, because you're a human as well. You can maybe, have I been through similar experiences like that in terms of like the sort of stimuli that are causing that experience? I have sort of, you know, had those stimuli before. I can maybe sort of understand the experience they're having. But with the guinea pig, like, they're not so different from us that we can't make any reasonable assumptions about how they feel, but they are more different to us than another human, probably in many ways. But yeah, it's a very complicated case.
And I think they even present dilemmas for the doctors who are assisting in these cases, because they know that the person actually doesn't want to die now. And the only reason why they're authorizing it now is in order to prevent them having to linger on at a later point when they will no longer be afforded the opportunity.
And fair enough, you would probably say that killing marzipan would be wrong, even for those merciful reasons. And yet you are saying that sometimes infanticide might be right, and I'm assuming that it doesn't have to be. I mean, the infant doesn't, or in your book, does the infant have to suffer now to justify the preemptive euthanasia, or is it?
Just as a reminder, we've only got 10 minutes left of this video to react to, and then that's the end of the reacting. And we've still got some way to go on the goal for the donations, and we haven't had a donation in a while. So where is everyone at? Make sure you get your donations in. Let's get to at least the full amount that we can match. So that would be another £30, because we have had 20 through from John. But yeah, if we can get another £30 through, you know, it would be amazing if we get another 50 through to get, you know, the green bar all the way to the end. But send in those donations so that we can get it all matched off to MSI Reproductive Choices. I saw someone in the chat ask what MSI is. There's a link in the description to the live. Go there and you can find out information. I've already gone over it in the start of the stream, or you can go back to the start of the stream. But yeah, get those donations in so that we can get everything sorted. And we've got 10 minutes left of the video to react to.
Sufficient that we know that the suffering will start in a week or two.
Well, I think if the suffering is now, it's not preemptive. It's that would be a standard case of euthanasia. I think the complexity in all of these cases is that there are gradations of considerations. So if you think about suffering doesn't come in one degree of intensity. There can be gradations. There can also be gradations in terms of how far in the future. Is it now? Is it in a minute's time, an hour's time, a day's time, a week's time, a year's time, 10 years' time? So there are gradations here. And I don't think it's possible to give a formula to say precisely when it's going to be justified and when it's not. So what I'm most comfortable doing is pointing out what I take the considerations to be. How we come down in a particular case depends on, as I've said, an array of things, including how bad do you take death to be for a being of a particular kind, and then how much suffering, and when will that suffering occur. Those are the kinds of considerations. And people can have different answers on those different points, and those are all going to impact, or could all impact, on the ultimate decision that you take. In the marzipan case, what's particularly worrying for me is that this is, as you've described the case, so far in the future that she's going to suffer in this way, that I don't know what level of confidence you can have that this is in fact the likely outcome. And once your confidence levels get reduced, then I think you need to err on the side of not harming, even if you're going to be thereby possibly allowing harm.
I can see in operation the one point, one philosophical point on which we differ, and that is that death is a bad, and we don't have to go in there. I mean, if death is a bad for you and in your book, then it is. One other consideration that we could take into account, or should take into account here, when I'm permitting marzipan's euthanasia, and you then probably aren't. Still, one consideration in the case of sentient humans and non-humans in our care. Well, they are clear. I mean, it is clear to me that I should perhaps do that decision for marzipan because she is in my care, and I should not breed guinea pigs or even let them breed, or any animals that are in our care. That's why I don't like factory farming or think that it's bad. And I think that even perhaps sterilization, chemical or surgical, might be an option for antinatalist activists now preventing the coming to existence of sentient lives. But well, now this turns into two questions. And the first is, would you object strongly to sterilizing pet animals? And then there's the extinction. And the second question, what about sentient non-humans, marsupials, cousins in the wild? They suffer too. And if a conscientious antinatalist is comfortable with the idea of sterilizations, wouldn't they have to extend that to the wild too? Or more generally, how, if at all, should we as antinatalists of your kind react to non-human reproduction and misery?
One answer to the question, I think, is clear for me, that we shouldn't be actively going out and breeding, whether it be companion animals or animals for human consumption. Now, if we're speaking about animals in the wild, or we're speaking about sterilizing animals, these raise other questions. And I'm going to, unfortunately, not satisfy you by just not answering that question now. I'm working on a new book at the moment, and I deal with these questions there. I'd like to work them out more fully in my mind and test them before I present them in a forum like this. So I would just like to delay answering that question, if you like.
I'm sure we're all looking forward to seeing what your thoughts on this in your recent and forthcoming books will be. So good to know that things are brewing there. Coming back to Marzipan, some commentators have pointed out that her case doesn't fall under the notion of antinatalism as, and this is your definition, the view that it is morally wrong to bring sentient beings into existence. And this is, of course, correct. The case as such is something else. But it only needs a little tweak. Remember, applied philosopher, applied ethicist, always talking about something else. It only needs a little tweak to change the situation. Now consider this. In addition to all the other details, Marzipan is pregnant. Before her own demise, she would have the time to produce a litter. And this litter might or might not then go on to repopulate the earth with guinea pigs. Now, by killing Marzipan, I would not only spare her from her impending suffering, but also, knowingly or not, prevent many sentient beings from coming into existence, which is sort of good thing. So in our panel, and I think this can also be traced back to Better Never to Have Been, at least in spirit, one of your definitions was that antinatalist adjective is of or relating to a person, policy, practice, law, attitude, etc., that discourages or reduces, I'm emphasizing, reduces the reproduction of sentient beings. And now killing Marzipan, according to this, is plainly an antinatalist act, killing the pregnant Marzipan, because it reduces the reproduction of sentient beings. So if the question was, and mine was, does antinatalism...
Yeah, but it would be antinatalist in a very different sense. It would be, because there are two different definitions of antinatalism at play here. One's the philosophical sense, and one is more of like a legislative sense or policy sense. I don't know how you want to refer to it. And I'm not sure if there's equivocation going on here, but yeah, let's just see what happens.
Antinatalism, as introduced in Better Never to Have Been, ever involve killing, deliberately and intentionally taking lives? The answer seems to be yes, it does. So it seems to me. But you will have to be the judge of this. So the question, in your view, is this modest conclusion that antinatalism sometimes justifiably kills or justifies killing valid? Or have I somehow horribly misunderstood and misinterpreted your case?
Yeah, I feel like there's an equivocation here, because in the sort of proposal that antinatalism involves killing, it's under the conceptual framework of the policy definition of antinatalism. But that is different from philosophical antinatalism, which I think is the sense in which the term is meant here. And whilst you can label a policy in some sense antinatalist, it's not antinatalist in the philosophical sense, which is maybe where it's trying to be dragged. But let's see what Benatar says.
Thanks. I think you have misrepresented me. I think the definition of antinatalism I'll stand by, but it doesn't follow, even as I say in Better Never to Have Been, that any means to an antinatalist end would be justified. That's going to depend in part on what other views you have. So if you think the ends always justify the means, then maybe you would think that going around killing pregnant women is justifiable because of the number of births you will prevent. But that's not a view I hold, because I take killing to be presumptively wrong, unless there's an excellent justification rooted in the interests of the being whose life you're taking. I wouldn't endorse that. That's why I don't endorse killing extinction. And so I don't think that if you're an antinatalist, you're committed to the view that all means for bringing about the prevention of birth are justifiable. That's going to require some additional views, which somebody may or may not have.
Yes, I understand. I understand. And you mentioned the killing of pregnant women. I was not suggesting that because we have another stopper in there, and that's their autonomous choice. And you emphasize that on better never to have been all the time. So there's no question about that. I was talking about non-human, non-autonomous animals in our care.
Sorry, let me just clarify, if you don't mind. I agree those two cases are different. I was using it as an extreme case to illustrate how and somebody with an antinatalist end might not always accept antinatalist means. And one reason why they won't hear is because they think that respecting the autonomy of the person who you're considering killing is an important consideration. And so just as somebody might bring up that consideration, they might bring up some other kind of consideration with regard to Marzipan. It wouldn't be her autonomy, but it would be, in my view, the fact that she has an interest in continuing to live.
And have we now established that early abortion is an act of antinatalism or not?
Well, my view is it depends on...
If it's one's own abortion, but going around and killing someone else who's pregnant, I don't think is.
What view you take about when somebody comes into existence in a morally relevant way. So I don't think that antinatalism per se tells you that early abortion is an antinatalist act. You've got to combine antinatalism with some other view about fetal moral status. And depending on which view you combine it with, you either reach the conclusion that you're preventing a life or ending a life.
And then I return to the point that then Better Never to Have Been is not just a book about antinatalism, it's a book about something else. Because let me quote you on this matter, and it's about the early abortion. Thus my conclusions should be viewed as recommendations about how a pregnant woman should make use of the freedom to choose whether or not to abort. I am recommending that she does abort and that she needs excellent reason not to. It should be clear that I don't think that there is any such reason, and that's a pretty strong statement for early abortion being the killing of the fetus or the embryo. And so I don't know. Sorry, maybe I'm confusing things here.
No, I mean, I think that is my conclusion, but it's a conclusion that comes from two earlier conclusions. The one is antinatalism, and then there's the claim about fetuses not having moral standing prior to sentience. So once you put those together, then the conclusion that you've just read out follows. But it doesn't follow just from antinatalism alone.
Okay, so of these options, we have now concluded that Better Never to Have Been is a book about antinatalism and some other things.
I think it's fundamentally about antinatalism. It employs some pessimism in the argument, and then it has implications for extinctionism. But again, I don't think it has any implications for the Marzipan case. I think other views are relevant there.
Okay, thank you very much. And thus spoke David Benatar, quite enlightening. I'm sure that our little chat has given our audience some food for thought. I'm thrilled that you could take the time to be here. So thank you very much, David.
And thank you for your interest in all of this. I really appreciate it. Very kind of you. Nice to have a discussion.
Thank you. And that concludes our proceedings here. To find out more, read David Benatar's books and stay tuned to this channel.
Nice. Okay. Let's come back onto here. All right. So we are finished reacting. We did not get any more donations through for that time. But if anyone wants to get in a donation literally in the next minute.
Oh, in this world, and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
I see what Bovine was doing. Okay, here we go. All right. Well, first of all, absolute legend. So I think Bovine was keeping me sweating and then came in, swooped in at the last second to get us to bam, look at it all in the green. We're over 100%. And we've also got John's super chat as well. Thank you so much to Bovine for doing that. Absolute top legend. And Bovine says only a few minutes left, and here I was thinking we've got 17 hours to go. Yeah, it was the way I set it up, was I didn't know how to make it properly, you know, the stuff. But Bovine says, you've picked one of my favorite charities, Lawrence. I'm so very happy to chip in. Bovine Blue Stocking. Thank you so much, Bovine. Absolute legend. And your £50 is getting doubled to £100, and it's all going to MSI. Thank you, everyone who donated. We had the saver at the end there, Bovine, but everyone who donated is an absolute legend, getting us to there, sending it all to MSI Reproductive Choices. We hit the goal, so it's all getting doubled as well. And then there's a bid on top. So in the ballpark, we'll be sending about 320-ish pounds to MSI Reproductive Choices. I will, of course, once I've made the donation, take a screenshot, share it, so you've all seen where your money's going and it doing its good work. Thank you so much for everyone for doing that. Thank you to Matty for producing his series and having the conversation with David Benatar that we reacted to. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I hope everyone has an excellent International Antinatalism Day, because we need to reminder that it is International Antinatalism Day. So yeah, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day celebrating antinatalism. Let me know in the comments below once the live is finished what you have done for International Antinatalism Day, and whether you'll be making any donations, whether you were one of the people who made a donation. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next live stream, the next video, the next whatever it is. Thank you for joining, and have a happy International Antinatalism Day. See everyone in the next one.